Outside.
Have you started?
No,
Hello?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Where are you from, Leonie? Where are you from, Leonie?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Joy, it's so nice to see you here. So nice to see everyone. Let's just get our place so we don't lose the... Here we are. So nice to see everybody. Good morning, Vivian. Good morning, Clive. Good morning, Lucette. Good morning, Sheila, Leonie, all the way out in Betty's Bay. So good to see everybody. Gail, very nice to see you. Of course, I can't know who Hawaii or Galaxy or iPhone is, but good morning to everyone. So good to see you. So yesterday we had a glitch in the middle of the shiur. I'm not going to recap everything I said in yesterday's class, but we'll give a quick and brief recap. Luckily, I was able to quickly get a video on to move yesterday's class over to Rabbi Kaplan, who is someone who I respect, and it certainly gives good classes. You can always watch his classes on our website. And I hope that was able to resolve yesterday's technical challenges. But today we're going to do a recap of where we left off, and we'll discuss a lot of important matters related to the story, because it is a story that's worthwhile to note, to discuss, to dissect, and it fits in with our Pirkei Avos Tools for Life series as well. So this is our Pirkei Avos book, and we'll look inside in the Mishnahs that we discuss. But today we're not doing the actual text of the Mishnah. We're going to discuss, since a lot of Pirkei Avos is about morals, ethics, and those matters. So we're going to dissect and discuss some of those things. And particularly, we had a question about the Kitty Genovese murder that took place in March of 1964. And this was a very tragic story for those who are familiar with it. It was a story that happened in Queens, New York. Any of you familiar with New York? New York is quite a city. I'm from New York, and there's what can I say? It's a city of what, 19 million citizens. I think there's a lot of similarities to Joburg in that sense. I'm talking about the inner city of New York. And the story in short was this lady, Kitty, was murdered early in the morning, about 3:15 in the morning. She came home from her job at a bar where she worked, and she was attacked, and she was stabbed. The money was taken from her, and then she was stabbed again, and who knows what else. It was a very graphic and horrific story. But the New York Times reported on the story, and what they realized was there were dozens of witnesses, no less than 38 people who heard the noises, who looked out of their windows, who saw what's going on, and yet despite that, people didn't interfere. As one person who was interviewed said, I saw part of the attack, but I didn't call the police. Why? Because I didn't want to mix in. And that could perhaps sometimes be the case with many incidents in life. Ask yourself, if you're driving on the highway and see something going on, will you interfere? Will you call the police? So you got to get on with your life. You got to do your own things. And that's a question about responsibility. Do we have a responsibility to interfere? Do we have a responsibility to take a look and see what's going on? Or why bother? And that's the question in this story, and so many stories like it that I'm sure you've seen in the news and the media. It raises that question. What responsibility do I have to others? Am I required to assist, to interfere, to help out, to get involved? when someone's in their hour of need and I can do something about it? Or is life just like, I do my thing, you do your thing, don't interfere, don't bother? What is it? And this is a debate that's been going on, and we could look at it from a halachic perspective, from a ethical, moral, social, secular, Jewish. One perspective that I saw in a halachic journal, and let me just quickly pick up that text. I did not put the text into the actual class presentation, but let me share with you a particular one that stood out. I don't know enough about this guy to tell you who he is or what he is, but this is a halachic journal. And in this journal, it discusses this idea. And it says, Western jurists do not believe that a person can be made to act positively in order to rescue someone else. And it's referencing Hall. I don't know who Hall is, but Hall explains, we do not believe that every person must be his brother's keeper. That, of course, is referring to, as we know, the story of Cain and Abel. Am I my brother's keeper, is what Cain responds to God when Hashem asks him, where is Hevel, your brother? And certainly this is something in life that's a very secular perspective. I don't interfere. It's not my business. I don't have to get involved. That's one perspective. And that's, of course, the question we're asking. Is there a moral, ethical responsibility? What would our Pirkei Avos tell us, right? Do we have to be involved in such a case or not? What do you think, guys? Should we get involved? Maybe we can have this discussion right here in our shir. As I said to you yesterday, if you are facing a moral, you have a choice. Perhaps there's a car accident on the road. Would you stop the car to help out? Would you pull out your phone, at least inform the police? I've seen this numerous times in my life where, I recall once rushing to a flight. I was driving from California to Nevada, to Las Vegas. And that's something you do when you're young, when you're 19 years old and you're with your friends. And we had to rush to our flight. We're on the road. So we couldn't stop to help out. There was a car accident, but we certainly pulled out our phones and reported it to the police when we saw a car blow up in front of us. And I'm sure you could all think of instances in your life where you face this question. Perhaps the question could get thornier in a situation where you see somebody perhaps drowning at sea. Now the question is, do you know how to swim? Don't you know how to swim? What if you do know how to swim, but it's a stormy day and the conditions are dangerous? Do you have an obligation to put yourself at risk to save this person? What if it's a little kid? To what extent do you put yourself at risk? And this is where we left off yesterday, looking at the Megillah, and I want to go into the Megillah a little bit and discuss this aspect from the Purim story, which begins tomorrow evening. In fact, tomorrow morning is Tainus Esther. Tomorrow we fast if we're able to. It's probably one of the lightest and easiest fasts in the Jewish calendar. The weather's not too bad. So if you're able to fast, great. But of course, if anybody's at risk for any reason, this is one of those fasts that is probably one of the last ones on the list that you would actually have to observe, because it's a fast that's, everything turned out well. Yom Kippur is a biblically mandated fast, and Tisha B'Av is the saddest day on our calendar, so you make every effort to fast on Tisha B'Av. But Tainus Esther, it all turns out well. So on the one hand, you could argue, if you're able to, this is one of the easiest fasts that you should certainly observe. On the other hand, it is an easy fast in the sense that, thank God it all worked out well, and you don't have to necessarily fast. And on that note, we can talk a little bit about Tainus Esther, because when Haman was accusing the Jewish people, and he tells Achashverosh, Yeshna amecha mefuzar mefarad ben amim. There's this one nation, one people who are scattered, who are splintered amongst your people, right? And it's very interesting that he says those words, because that was his accusation against us, that we're different than everybody else, that we're different, that the Jewish people are not the same as everyone. And that's precisely why Achashverosh should do away with this. But perhaps if you look at it from another perspective, maybe he was talking about the fact that we Jews are, one of our problems was that we weren't united with each other. And that certainly was an issue. And the Rebbe spoke about that concept. In fact, next week, 2 weeks' time, will mark, goodness, I remember it like yesterday, 1992, when the Rebbe suffered a debilitating stroke. And since that day in 92, we haven't been able to be privileged to hear his teachings firsthand. But his last talk was on this week's Parsha. And in fact, he gave out a book that published a mimer, a discourse, talks about the idea of Ata Tetzava. This week's Parsha is the command to kindle the menorah. And what is it that the menorah was lit with? The Torah describes Shemen Zayit Zach, pure olive oil. How do you procure pure olive oil? So the Torah tells us you take the olive, you squeeze it, you crush it, and then that little bit of oil that comes out, that is your pure olive oil with which the menorah was kindled. And the Rebbe elucidated on that idea that in order to get the oil, in order to extract the oil from the olive, you have to crush it. You have to really squeeze it out. And he said, he was talking then about Russian Jewry. As you all know, my family came from Russia, but my family left Russia in the mid-1940s. It was then the fall of the Iron Curtain, 1991, 1992. And Chabad, the Lubavitch movement, remained steadfast, strongly committed, resolute in commitment to Judaism throughout the 70 years of the communist era. And Chabad kept underground schools. And the Rebbe was commenting, on one hand, complimenting the Hasidim who stayed behind there and literally risked their life for the preservation of Judaism. But then he was lamenting that when they were being crushed, when the communists were forbidding any Jewish religious practice, these guys were at the forefront in the vanguard of preserving Yiddishkeit, of running the underground network of yeshivas, of cheders, of mikvahs, of shuls, farbrengens, education, you name it. And yet, when communism finally fell apart, or when some of these people got out of Russia, came to America or Israel or wherever else they went to, and there was freedom of religion, and sadly, many of them all of a sudden took it as freedom from religion. He said it's uncanny. It's strange. Where you're being persecuted, you're fighting for your Yiddishkeit. And where you have the freedom to practice, you abandon it. He spoke about the idea of what crushed the olive. And if you think about this, there is a commentary on the Megillah by the, I'm trying to recall his name, Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz, the author of Lecha Dodi. And he talks about this idea of why do we give gifts to each other? We talked about this concept in a previous year. What was it? Monday, we talked about the idea of the 4 mitzvahs of Purim, the 4 M's, if you're trying to recall the mnemonic. You have Megillah, to hear the Megillah's M number 1. Mishlach manot, to give gifts to your friends, to create the camaraderie and friendship, is number 2. Matanat Lavyonim, giving charity to the poor, is number 3. And Mishta, to have a meal, is number 4. So what's the significance of the Matanat of the Mishlach Manot? Why do we have to give gifts to each other? Obviously, we understand giving to the poor makes sense to help them, that they should also be able to celebrate the holiday well. And we understand the festive meal, it's a way to celebrate for ourselves. And of course, reading the book of the Megillah, it's only logical that we want to honor the event, we want to recall. That all makes sense. But he asks about the Mishlach Manos, why do we have to give the gifts to our friends? And so he explains that actually it gets to the heart of the Purim story. Why? We all know that Haman was, his plan to kill the Jews. But how was Haman able to do this? What made him do so? And as I mentioned, he says to Ahasuerus that there's one nation, one people who are different. They are scattered and divided amongst your countries, your provinces. That's one way of understanding mafuzar or mafarad. But another way to understand it, says Reb Shlomo Alevi Alkabetz, is there's one nation, Yeshna Amech, the one nation, the Jewish people. They are mafuzar or mafarad. Instead of being a unified people, they are diversified. I don't mean diversified in a good way. Instead of being loving and caring and sensitive to one another, they are mafuzar, they're scattered, maforad, they're fragmented, they're broken, faribbled. Haman was pointing out our vulnerability because there was internal Jewish strife, which unfortunately happens. Jew fighting Jew, brothers turning against one another. So of course, in their hearts, they were fragmented, they were divided. And this division amongst the Jews is what created the possibility for a successful attack against us. It's that division, that fragmentation. And ironically, of course, this was what brought our antidote. That's what ultimately brought us back together. Remember when Esther says to Mordechai, we're going to discuss this in a moment, she says, Lech k'naisus kol haYudim. Go gather all the Jews. Let me pick that up. Where did it go? Okay, I'm going to only, I already forgot where that slide is. But the point is, go gather the Jews together is what she says. Bring them together as one. And when we're unified, nothing can destroy us. Haman is defeated. The only way to defeat the Hamans of history is to create that love and friendship in our community. And when we have that unity, then nothing can destroy us. And that's precisely why we send gifts to each other on Purim. We want to foster feelings of closeness, of caring, of love to each other. On that note, I want to thank all those who've helped us to put together our Shalach Manas and our gifts. And I want to thank you, Cynthia. I see her here for the cold drinks that we're going to use for those who come to the Purim party at Shul. And I want to thank, I saw you here before, Patsy, for your Hamantashen gifts. And I want to thank Frangelica's who sponsored the Hamantashen that I'll be taking to all the various senior centers on Friday. And other sponsors who've helped us. And please God, we're going to get thousands of Shalach Manas packs out to everyone in town. So all the seniors, please God, I'm going to go personally to a whole lot of retirement homes. Anyone who's here who wants to join us, and if you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook, and if you're not watching us live right now, if you could be in contact with me before Friday. We need even more volunteers this week because we want to get gifts to every Jewish senior in town. We're sending to all the Jewish schools, and we're sending to all 30 facilities that we're in contact with. We want to make sure that everyone gets a little Shalach Manas gift from us. And we're packing thousands of them. And we hope to reach as many people as possible to celebrate Purim. So that's the idea of Purim, to bring that love, that unity, that camaraderie, that friendship, those feelings to each other. And that, of course, is so important that we do so on Purim. It brings me to another question that comes to my mind. Sorry that I'm digressing for a moment. But every morning before we pray, before davening, we say the mitzvah, Hareini, we say this expression, Hareini mekabel elai mitzvah saseh shel v'ahavta l'recha k'mocha. I take upon myself to love my fellow as myself. Meaning before we can even express our love to God in our prayers, before we could say that v'ahavta Hashem l'kecha, expressing our love to Hashem, our God, we want God to know that we love our fellow human beings. And that's why we declare that phrase, v'ahavta l'recha k'mocha, to love our neighbor as ourselves. You ever wondered why love your neighbor? In fact, we say this, Rabbi Akiva said this is the most important principle of the whole Torah. Hillel echoed that when he was asked by a convert who wanted to join Judaism, tell me the whole Torah while we're standing on foot. What did Hillel say? Something very similar. What's hateful to you, don't do to others. But why is it saying love your neighbor? Maybe love humanity wouldn't that be better? Why just love your neighbor? Why the emphasis on l'reyacha, on your neighbor? If they're not your neighbor, you don't have to love them. How far does your neighbor go? Is your neighbor anyone in Joburg? Is your neighbor anyone in South Africa? Is your neighbor Zambia, Zimbabwe? Who's your neighbor? And if they're not your neighbor, you don't have to love them. But recently I noticed something simple that I think perhaps could illustrate the point we're trying to make here. You ever notice how people get very emotional? Very, whenever you watch a movie, you read a novel, all of a sudden, and it's fictional, it's not even true, yet people get all emotional about it. And they start having feelings, you relate to the character, what's the word for it? Commiserate with them, right? And you hear that the breaking up, and they go, oh my gosh, here we go again, it's horrible. What if your neighbor says they're going through trouble, having some emotional struggles? Oh, haknish kanshanik, don't bother me, just figure it out. Can't you get along? What if it's our kid? What if it's our sibling? No patience, no tolerance. Stop it already. Always, where's our tolerance? Where's our feelings? Why is it? I know this personally. If some stranger's acting weird in the street, it doesn't bother me. Right? All of a sudden, if it's my sibling or my relative, my friend, whoever it is that I know personally, start having weird feelings about it. So maybe this is the idea. It's easy oftentimes to let go when it's a stranger, or to have feelings for a character in the novel or movie. But it's much harder to love your neighbor and your friends and your family, because they are real human beings. They're the people you really have to get along with, and it's much harder to get along with them. So to love humanity, yeah, that's easy. That's not the instruction. It's easy to love people you don't know. Who's the one who said it? I love mankind. It's people I can't stand. I'll give you a shir. Remind me after Shavuos, after Pesach. It's one of those shiurim that I like to give that time of the year when we're counting the Sphira. And the concept then we'll talk about the students of Rabbi Akiva. It was much harder for us to relate to pandemic a few years ago than it is today. Today, I think we can understand how it's possible that Rabbi Akiva's students, so many of them died in one period over 7 weeks. How many do we lose in our community over this period? So it's not so hard for us to relate to it now. And why was it that Rabbi Akiva, who to him, this verse, to love your fellow as yourself, he said is the most important principle of the whole Torah, and his students couldn't get along with each other. We'll talk about that idea of how it's easier to love Am Yisrael than Rebbe Yisrael. So remind me after Pesach to give you that shmooze. But the point I'm making here is the Torah is telling us, don't love humanity. Just love your neighbor. Just love your family. Love the person you see often. Work on loving the friend whose faults and idiosyncrasies you actually know very well. The truth is, if we all love our neighbors, then all of humanity will be loved, won't it? And that's what the Baal Shem Tov told us, this concept, this idea, that just as we love ourselves despite our faults, despite we know our own shortcomings, yet we still love ourselves. So the Megillah is telling us to celebrate Purim by giving gifts ish l're'eu, to our friends, to our neighbors. This is the idea of the hafta l'reyacha, love your fellow. The goal is to create love and unity within our community. So when you give mishloach manos, when you're sharing gifts of love to your friends, you're bringing peace and harmony to a sometimes fractured community. When did Haman realize he could destroy us? He says there's this one nation, Mefuzar Meforad Ben Amin, who are scattered, divided, splintered amongst the peoples. Let's make sure we're not that, because that's when we were most vulnerable. That's when we were able to be destroyed. So now you see the Mishloach Manos industry. Online you could send Purim gifts anywhere in the world. There are themes for Mishloach Manos arrangements. Look around, to go online. We needed to send to some people in the US. Batya ordered it on Friday, and believe it or not, On their website, it says that it's a 5-day delivery. So order by Friday if you want it to reach them by next Friday. You think about it, Friday, and it's 5-day work days. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We'll get them in time for Purim. We ordered it Friday just before Shabbos, and one family in Albany, it's not even in the heart of New York, they told us they already received the Shalach Manas and the delivery Shabbos. And it's beautiful that today it's easier than ever to share that love. And what else? It's a support. I'm assuming it's a big business these days. A lot of people making these things. You could get all types of Shalach Manas from chocolate to sushi to who knows, all the different themes. There's even organic and vegan and tofu-based Shalach Manas. You name it, it's out there. You could get a Shalach Manas, So the Shalach Manas, the point is that we have to create that friendship amongst ourselves. And over the past century, and especially very recently, we've seen all the advances in science and technology and medicine and communication. And now, thank God, the vaccine is here in South Africa. We're able to get it, right? Thank God we have all these advances. Why are these advances possible? It's because people were able to put the differences aside and to put their minds together, to come together to solve the problems. We would have no vaccine for coronavirus today if there wasn't a unification. So we have to know that, and sadly at the same time, as much as we have social media, people are as distant as could ever be. That's why I hate the term social distancing. We don't need social distancing. We need physical distancing these days until there's herd immunity, until everyone's, please God, all better. And coronavirus is gone. But the point is, what is it that brought us all this scientific progress and breakthroughs? It was unity. It was coming together. And this is what I think we need most today. That's the purpose. That's why it's so important that we fulfill this mitzvah of the Shalach Manas in whatever way possible. It does, it can also be a phone call. Halachically, the minimum is 2 types of food to at least one friend. You notice for Matanas Lavyonim, it's at least 4 people that you help out. But we need to use our intelligence today to find ways to help others, to use our imagination to discover new ways to be loving and caring. And I want to give a big shout out to all those on this group present today and anyone else who would like to join. We have a wonderful team of care callers. And they're not getting accolades, they're not published in the newspaper every week. These are the people who pick up the phone and make sure to call 5 or 10 senior citizens every week to reach out to them, to uplift them, to help them. That is what I call social connection, not social distancing. That's what we need. That's the antidote to the animosity in the Purim story that Haman describes us as a scattered and broken nation. Because we need today more than ever is we need to get more of that love, care, concern for our neighbors, for our friends. I know it's not always easy, but you know what? It's something we have to do. And only you can truly help your neighbor, your family, because only you know what they need. Each one of us should try to do a little bit more in that sphere. And when we live our lives in a way that we are there for others, as the Torah says we should be, then are people united as one. So this Purim, do what you can in a safe way. I'm not telling anybody to break the safety, God forbid. We can't let our guard down now. But fulfill this mitzvah, finding a way to cultivate more friendship and more feelings of love and care and concern for each other, because that's the antidote to the Purim, to the hatred out there against us. And so let's continue. I don't know how I digressed this far on a little side note I wanted to say, but let's just to analyze this story that we're discussing here, the Megillah's most dramatic moments where Esther is hesitant, where Esther's not ready to go to the king. And Mordechai comes on the attack. And he says, if you don't go, don't you know this is your moment to shine? This is it. So I told you yesterday we're going to try to analyze, because there was obviously a debate going on between Mordechai and Esther. We have to understand what was the debate about. Why does Esther not want to go at first? And then she concedes and she says to Mordechai, okay, I will go. And what does she say? Let's just recall the words of Hasher avadati, ahavadati, and if I'll perish, so I'll perish, but I'm willing to risk my life. And we said, yes, that we have to try to understand what is it that Esther all of a sudden felt that that changed her mind, and that she tells Mordechai, go gather the people. Why does she say gather the people? Because she realized that is the antidote to Haman's plot. Right now we are too fractured of a people. We need to come together as a people. So she says, gather the people together. And make sure to fast and don't eat or drink for 3 days and nights. Yeah, you're getting off easy now, guys. You only have to fast tomorrow from morning to night, only if you are able to do so. Esther wanted a 3-day fast, proper intermittent fasting. She wanted everyone to get ready and have a good appetite for the Hamantashen on Purim. So the question, of course, is, if Esther was hesitant to go, she had her reservations. You know, my husband hasn't called me in a month and 30 days. Why, when Mordechai, so to say, threatens her and says, if you remain silent at this time, then then relief and rescue will come to the Jews from elsewhere. And you and your father's household will perish. Why all of a sudden, before she was hesitant to go, now all of a sudden she says, okay, I'm going. What was this about? And like I said, there's a lot to discuss and to analyze why Esther has the sudden shift that she goes ahead full steam, right? What's happening here? So one explanation is it was a matter of, it was all about the timing. Okay, it was an issue of timing. And Esther was saying, well, we have 11 months. This isn't a thing, you know, there was a date set for the extinction, for the extermination of the Jews that Haman put in place. And it's not today. We have 11 months to strategize, to plan, to figure it out. And Mordechai says, no, when your people are at risk, this is urgent, this is critical. You go immediately. So here's one aspect of the debate, one idea that it's going to take some time. And in fact, the Vilna Gaon talks about it, and he explains that Esther said that it won't be effective if I go right now. She's trying to calm Mordechai's nerves down. And the Vilna Gaon explains this idea. On the contrary, it's going to ruin things. It's well known that any man or woman, these are Esther's words, who comes to the king in the inner court unsummoned, there's one law. Remember what he did to his first wife. What will I gain if I'm going to see the same fate that Vashti saw? In all likelihood, he's going to call me soon. You know, no man can live so long without the beauty of a wife like Esther. So let me just wait a few days. The king will call me in. I'll talk to him. We'll work it out. What's the urgency that I have to put my life at risk for this? And Mordechai is saying, who knows whether a time like this is, you know, don't spare the moment. It's a debate. How do you know the king's going to call you soon? Maybe it's going to take some time. So this was the debate according to the Vilna Gaon. That Esther saying, let's not rush. And Mordechai saying, yes, let's rush. That's one way of seeing it. Was a matter of, it was a disagreement about diplomatic strategy. Do we see things as critical, urgent? Or is it a matter of, you know, strategize, work it out, right? So that's one way to see it. But considering all this, we get the sense that there's more to the discussion between Mordechai and Esther here. So here's another commentary, the Malbim. Let me read to you his words. The Malbim says that she answered him with two arguments. Firstly, she says, if she enters the king's chambers now, she could be in danger, which would obviously destroy the whole purpose why Mordechai is sending her in. And if so, she would also not achieve the whole purpose. So beyond the technical discussion of the best time to approach the king, there was a broader issue that needed to be addressed. Esther's argument was really an ethical, halachic argument about the extent of her duty to her people. But Mordechai, we know, gets rough with her. He says, if you remain silent at this time, you and your whole family will perish. You're not going to gain any favor. So, again, it's a matter that Esther's feeling, do I have to mix in? I haven't been summoned to the king in so long. I'll be in danger. It won't work out. And yet Mordechai still insists that she has an obligation, a duty. She has to go. And this is a matter that I think needs some discussion in general. In general, many scholars in secular law is concerned with rights, and halacha is concerned with responsibilities, with our duties. People are born with certain fundamental liberties, and so they might submit themselves to the authority of the government in order to safeguard those rights, those freedoms. And perhaps this is a discussion right now about the vaccine, people debating whether it's a right or a duty, whether they have to get vaccinated, whether it's for their own benefit or if it's for the greater benefit. It's a current discussion currently. Okay, and there are many political theorists and different perspectives of this about whether you have an obligation or responsibility at this stage to get vaccinated, whether it's for your benefit or for the greater benefit. And perhaps the conclusive matter about this discussion is the government will prevent its citizens from harming each other, but cannot force people to do something on behalf of another. And that's perhaps the debate currently about getting vaccinated. For the most part, if I were to witness a crime or see someone in danger, do I have a law? Is there a law obligating me to intervene? Not me, possibly yes, as a paramedic. In fact, a paramedic could lose his license in this country, even if you're not on shift or duty, for passing an emergency situation without offering treatment, at least until more care arrives. And in countries like Australia and Canada and Britain and the US, you don't have a responsibility to even alert authorities. You could live your life. As long as you're not harming anyone, no problem. There's a lot of debate about this, especially since in recent years it's come to light about molestation issues and things like that unfortunately exist. And it's certainly put a light on the laws of the duty to report. As you know, in many places, and sadly our community was not in any way exempt from this, there were stories of things happening in schools, it happened in the churches, and it happened sadly in shuls too. We have to be very strong and firm and resolute not to allow this type of abuse to ever go on. And many rabbis, unfortunately, thank God, I don't know if it was relevant here in South Africa, but I was involved in such a case a couple of years ago where an incident occurred. I was not aware of it at the time. I wasn't present. Obviously, if I saw it, called the cops. But a case was brought to my attention. And I had to do my responsibility and report it to social services. I reported the matter. I went to court. I'm not going to get into the details of the discussion. The point is, there are laws that actually incentivize whistleblowers or witnesses of certain crimes to come forth and report it. But I don't know if legally they have an obligation to do so. And today they're trying to fix the laws of many countries that someone who is aware, if you know something, say something. We have to. We have an obligation to do so. But currently, that's not the law legally. There are what they call Good Samaritan laws. And in fact, Good Samaritan laws will protect and defend people who if a paramedic is on the road and is not on shift, not on duty at that moment, and saves a life, and perhaps there's malpractice accusations. There are Good Samaritan laws that might defend them because they didn't have a duty to necessarily do something, and now they need legal protection. And there are laws that could assist them with this. I'm not going to go into the intricacies of that, but this is a discussion about rights versus responsibilities. Just put this here, okay? In the U.S., it's all about your rights, and in Jewish law, there's no such thing as rights. There are responsibilities, there are duties, and the law in most countries are there to safeguard and protect your rights. But in Torah, it's very different. In Torah, it is a duty, it's a responsibility. And in fact, in the Israeli Knesset, there was a law that was, I don't know if it was passed or not, the discussion was called the Chok Lo Ta'amod Al Dam Re'echa. The law of not to stand idle. What is Lo Ta'amod Al Dam Re'echa? Not to stand idle by your friend's blood. That means if you know of a particular situation and you got to stand up and say something, because blood is not only the blood that spills, but blood could be, a situation where somebody was abused in one way or another, and the feelings, the emotions, that's also blood. That expression that we used to say as kids, sticks and stones could break my bones, but words don't hurt. Oh, yes, they do. So the Torah law doesn't consider, actively helping others in need just a right. Lo tamod adam re'echa. The Torah says don't stand idly when your friend's blood is being spilled. You have an actual obligation. You see an accident, make that phone call if you can't get out and help save their life. I won't go into the swimming one because it all depends on the circumstances. If you yourself know how to swim, actually, if you don't know how to swim, you shouldn't go into that water. There was a situation a few months ago, I think in Maryland, or Virginia, where there was a Rebbe, a school teacher, Jewish school teacher, where he ran in to rescue some kids in the water. And I think he died, and there was nothing, and they were saved. It doesn't help us to lose another life. You have to know how to swim if you want to go into the water. I think I saw also a case in California last week where a father jumped in to save his kids in turbulent waters. And unfortunately, he died. I think the kids may have also. So the point I'm making is that from a halachic perspective, we have an obligation, we have a duty to help save a life in whatever way possible. The way Judaism sees things is there's more to life than to live and let live as society sees it. We are called upon by Torah. We have a duty of mankind. That what does it mean to live a purposeful existence? If you have an opportunity to help save a life, you have to do what you can on an individual level, on a community level, in every way. You have to proactively do what you can. So let's go back to the case that we opened up with Kitty Genovese, okay? And there's no doubt that from the Torah's perspective, her neighbors should have intervened, should have called the police much quicker than they did. It took so long for anyone to do it. One of the stories I heard, the Rebbe's mother was so proud that she used to tell about where she saw the potential leadership in her son, who became the Rebbe. She said that once when the Rebbe was a young boy, and she saw that there was a commotion, they lived in Dnepropetrovsk, which is in Ukraine, and somehow at the riverbank, there was some kind of a commotion going on. She was there with her kids, and she was wondering what's happening. And somebody said to her, well, her son fell into the water, was drowning, and all of a sudden, another kid jumped into the river and pulled him out. And the Rebbe's mother describes her pride when she discovered who was the boy who saved that drowning child. It was none other than her son Menachem Mendel, who somehow escaped from her. And she was filled with dread because she didn't know. When she heard the kid was drowning, she thought maybe it was her son who wasn't with her. And now her son appeared soaking wet, but she understood he was the boy who saved the other kid's life. And she knew then already his leadership qualities that he possessed. So the point, of course, to us is that from a Torah perspective, we have a duty, we have an obligation, we have a responsibility to help save a life. And this is something that happens over and over. You could think of who knows how many, there's a great story that comes to mind. Talking about drowning, it's a story that happened in Israel about 10 years ago. There was a young Israeli rowing champion named Yasmin Feingold. I don't know if you recall this story, but she was, I think, preparing for a major, maybe it was for Olympics, some major competition. And at some point, her boat somehow capsized. It turned over, and she suffered a blow to her head. She lost consciousness, and she was luckily spotted by a guy named Avi Toibin. This is in Tel Aviv, in the water in the Yarkon River. The problem was that the Yarkon River is notoriously filthy. It's badly polluted by industrial waste, by sewage, and people have known for years you don't go into the Yarkon River. Now, you see, he's witnessing a situation here where this lady who's a rowing champion, practicing for the Olympics, her boat turns over, she's hurt. What do? What's Avi supposed to do? Is he to go into that water to save her, and risk himself? Because in fact, I think in some time back, that water was known for its fungus, and it was really bad. So he has now a debate in his mind. Does he go into the water and help save this lady, this Yasmin? And what would you do? What would you say? Avi jumped in, and thank God he wasn't harmed. He wasn't affected. He wasn't, even the water was unsanitary. And both he was perfectly fine. Yasmin recuperated. But my question to you then is there a moral obligation to risk your life if you are, to help save someone else's? This was recent in Israel. And this story is actually discussed in the Gemara. The Talmud discusses this. In the Jerusalem Talmud, it discusses this idea of to what extent do you need to risk yourself to help save someone else's life. So let me share with you what the Gemara says. The Gemara puts it this way. That you're only obligated to rescue someone else and even put yourself. Sorry, let me just read it to you in the words of the Gemara instead of interpreting it, okay? The Gemara says as follows. One is obligated to rescue and even put themselves at possible danger to do so, to help save someone else's life. Why? So the Gemara's theory, the logic is, Bari v'shema bari adif. Or in the Talmud's words, vadai and safek. The vadai, the certainty is, if you don't jump into that water, that person's certainly going to drown and die. She cupped her head in the water. If you jump into that water to save her, is it certain you're going to die? If you're healthy, you hopefully, so the point is, the victim will definitely die. The rescuer might die. And that's the Gemara's theory, the logic. And why you have to actually go and save the life of another person in such a situation. And the Gemara, in fact, relates a story for this. Let me read the story to you. The Gemara says Rabbi Imi was captured by bandits and he was in great danger. Okay, this is a long time back. The Gemara says Rav Imi was captured by bandits and was in grave danger. When they heard the news, the other sages, Rabbi Yochanan, said, let the dead be wrapped in his burial shroud. On the other hand, Reish Lakish, who I've told you lots about him, he was formerly a bandit. He said, either I will kill the bandits or I will be killed. I will go and rescue him by force. And he went and he used his persuasion. I guess being a former bandit himself, Reish Lakish was able to persuade them. He knew their language. He was able to talk to them. And so the Gemara tells us, although Reish Lakish succeeded in rescuing his colleagues without any physical confrontation and nobody was harmed, but in the words of the Talmud, we see how he was clearly prepared to accept the risk upon himself to go save a life. And what's this based on? That the Gemara tells us that there's the definite, inevitable death of the victim. Rav Imi was captured in the hands of bandits, and Reish Lakish says, I'm strong. Either I could rescue him or I'll die. We don't know. At the end, he proved he was able to rescue without any confrontation. He was able to talk to them. But the point he was able to make was that the obligation in Jewish law, if there is doubt and certainty, obviously, if you don't know how to swim, then it's certain that you're going to die too, because how could you go into treacherous waters if you don't know how to swim? On the other hand, if you do know how to swim, then take that risk. That's what the Gemara is saying. And it illustrated it with the story about Reish Lakish, who said, either I will kill the bandits or I will be killed. He was willing to risk himself, and the Gemara says he did the right thing. And this is discussed further in the commentaries. Rabbi Yoel Circus was known as the Bach, and he talks about this story. And he concludes that the leading authorities of the time, they must have ruled that one is not obligated to risk their own life to help save someone else's, because it was a debate between Reish Lakish and the other rabbis. So obviously, we're going to have to conclude in 5 minutes, and I had some more points that I wanted to share with you. So the point I'm making is that it's a matter of discussion and certainly a matter of debate. And I think there's another story that comes to mind that perhaps could illustrate this. The Gemara tells a story that there were certain Galileans, people from the Galil, Israel, and the rumor was spread that they killed someone. And they came to Rav Tarfon and they said to him, hide us. Rav Tarfon wanted to know, how should I act? Should I not hide you, then the people who are accusing you of you killing them, then the family members who want to take revenge of their murdered relative, they would see you, and your life is at risk. Should I hide you? Then I'll be acting contrary to what the rabbi said, that you shouldn't help an apprentice to, not an apprentice, someone who was involved in a murder. So what do I do? He said, you go and hide yourself. I don't know if it was for one person or multiple people, whatever the case was. So Rav Tarfon has the opportunity to rescue these people from likely death if they're caught because they were accused of the murder of this fellow, probably talking about Jews and Jews. And Rav Tarfon is aware that these guys might actually be murderers, in which case sheltering them would be putting himself at risk. So Rav Tarfon declines to help them. He says, go do what you got to do. So from this story, it seems that there's no obligation to endanger himself to rescue someone else. And we seem to have a disagreement here. The Gemara says earlier in the Jerusalem Talmud that you have an obligation, a responsibility to help save a life if there's any potential. And here, Rav Tarfon doesn't seem to be heeding that law. Anyways, this is something that's discussed further in the Gemara, and I think the conclusion was that we have an obligation to help our fellow human being, but this obligation, and the entire complex of Torah-based duty is qualified by another obligation, and that obligation is to live. And therefore, in a case where you yourself are going to face death, there it's not so clear if you have to actually save another life. In fact, the Torah says, Chayecha kodman, your life takes precedence. Okay, so this obviously is a further debate, which I'm not going to go into right now. But the point is that there's a lot of discussion, and the conclusion is, if your life yourself is also in grave danger, then you have no obligation to save another person's life. If the rescuers will survive, then you do have an obligation. But if your own life is now going to be at risk, then you don't have an obligation. No obligation to risk your life to save someone else's life. That's the conclusion of this moral ethical debate here in this case. Whoops. And perhaps one could say that what is a biblical precedence of this? In the story of Moshe Rabbeinu. Remember when Moshe at the let's go into the context of Moshe in Egypt. After killing an oppressive taskmaster who, remember the instance of Dasan and Avir, and then Moshe faces danger in his own life, because the next day Moshe Rabbeinu is told by a fellow Jews, Dasan, you're going to kill us, you're going to do to us what you did to that Egyptian. And Moshe realizes, I'm in danger. My own life is in danger now. And so before he goes back on his mission to Egypt, when God dispatches him to help rescue and save the Jews, Hashem says, don't worry, your life, you're no longer at risk in that situation. And from this, our sages tell us that when your own life is at risk, then you don't have an obligation to help save the other person. So where did we go to in all this? What's this all about? There's a lot to discuss here, but I want to conclude our shir because we obviously have to get going. So let's just conclude in 5. I think we started about 10:05 or so today. So let's try to fill it in the hour. Go back to the message, go back to the narrative in the Megillah, where Esther says, I haven't been summoned to the king, and therefore I have no obligation to risk my life because this king is a madman, Achashverosh. Remember, he killed his first wife. He might kill me as well. And yet, Mordechai says, no, you do have an obligation. Don't imagine that you are going to escape in the king's house from among all the Jews, because if you remain silent at this time, you're not going to be safe either. And that's what Mordechai is saying. That you think you're safer. You could wait it out. Mordechai is saying, no, you're a Jew. When they find out you're a Jew, you'll be killed too. So the same danger that we're in, you're in too. It's not the same as Moshe. And that, of course, we were taking a halachic angle to the story. But I want to conclude with a message for each of us. That was a halachic angle, and I shared with you a few little insights about the idea of camaraderie and friendship. But I think if we really want to take the essence of this story, of Mordechai's message to Esther, is that we all have this same message that Mordechai was saying to, just think about Esther in her situation, in her position. King Achashverosh conducts this international search for a queen. And somehow of all the women of the whole entire world, who does he choose? A Jewish girl named Esther. He doesn't know she's Jewish. Of course, he probably wouldn't have chosen her had he known indeed that she was. Can you imagine, I don't know, Hassan Rouhani, who is the current Iranian prime minister, falling in love with and marrying a religious Jewish woman? Could you imagine such a situation? He's described, Achashverosh in the Megillah, as the ruler of 127 countries. He's probably the most powerful person in the world at his time. And who was the beloved wife of this king? Esther. When else in history was a Jew or Jewess so close to the seat of such immense power and influence? With that sort of access to the powers that be. And you would think that the Jews could finally breathe easy. Finally, the Jew in such a prominent position. But it was under Queen Esther's watch, during what seemed to be a period of unique security and stability for Jews, that they had one of their own in such a high, prominent position of power. And yet Haman, during that time, was able to convince Achashverosh to kill every single Jewish man, woman, and child in one day. The Yom Echad, the Megillah describes. The closest to that would be the Nazis' final solution in more recent times. But even the Germans, as far as they went in their pursuit to kill Jews, they couldn't come up with a plan of such high scale and speed to kill all Jews in one day. That was impossible. They had an extermination plan of gas chambers and concentration camps. Took years and they didn't succeed. Haman thought he could do it in one single day. And this is with Esther in the highest seat of power. Mordechai was aware of the fact that there was something supernatural going on. And so he told Esther, the fact that you are where you are, the fact that you are the queen, that's proof that this is your moment. This is why you're there. Don't give me the technicalities. The king hasn't called you in. It's clear that you've been chosen for this job. Yes, we can argue about the technical obligations. Are you responsible? Should you, shouldn't you, as you put your life at risk? All those ideas that we discussed. But Mordechai says, it's in your hands. This is your moment to shine. It's obvious that there are many rules and regulations and red tape. And you could argue why you don't have a responsibility. Let's make it relevant to ourselves. This is relevant to each and every single one of us, just like it was to Esther. Every single one of us, we know we're indispensable to God's plan in this world. We have to know that there's a reason why we're here in the first place. Not knowing why I have to fulfill this task in this place doesn't change anything. So whenever we're presented with any opportunity to help someone else out, we have to seize that opportunity. Carpe diem, as Mordechai says to Esther, because this is your moment. Maybe this is why you were put into the palace. And each of us has that same opportunity almost every single day. When we have an opportunity to call someone, to intervene in a situation, to uplift someone else, we have to connect. We have to do what we can. We have to realize, like Mordechai says to Esther, seize the moment. Maybe this is why you're here on earth. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. That's what each one of us have to realize is our responsibility, our duty, as the Torah tells us. We each have it's not about our rights. It is our responsibility, our duty. We have to do what we can to help save another person's life. And this is what Mordechai said. It's for this time that you are here. This is what you were here. It's time to act. It's time for each of us to act. Every moment we have that opportunity, let's do exactly that. With that, my friends, I'll conclude. Carpe diem, suck the marrow out of life. Seize the opportunities. See you, please God, tomorrow morning. Same time, same place, right here in our Chabad Senior Zoom room. Looking forward to see you. Thank you. Any questions before we go?